Good afternoon. Or do I have to say, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the greatest show on earth. Is that more appropriate? Well, welcome to this afternoon's program on this gorgeous day. Thanks for choosing to come indoors to enjoy this program with us. My name is Candace Summers. I'm the Senior Director of Education here at the McLean County Museum of History. And we are thrilled to have Maureen Brunsdale back with us today. I mean, I feel like I don't even need to introduce her, but I will. Special Collections Librarian at ISU's Milner Library, and she's going to shine a spotlight on one of the greatest female flyers of all time, circus legend Antoinette Concello. But before I go any further, I do want to thank our live stream sponsor, GLT, Bloomington Normal's public media, part of the NPR network. So if we give a round of applause for GLT, helping us live stream. And thank you for those tuning in at home, wherever you may be. We are so excited to have this program today. Immediately following the program, we will have a book signing with Maureen in the Visitor Center back on the ground floor, which you can pick up your copy of her newest book, if you haven't already, In the Shadow of the Big Top, The Life of Ringling's Unlikely Circus Savior, which just won an award. She literally told me minutes ago the Stuart Thayer Award for Best Circus Scholarship in the past year. So this makes it even better to buy your copy today, and she will sign it. But we also still have copies of her first book, The Bloomington Normal Circus Legacy, which I have to say, if I don't use this book, I contact Maureen, but it's a great resource for all things local circus. And of course, circus swag. So we still have one shirt, kid size, sorry, from the normal 150 with the circus theme. So if you have a young one at home, who is a youth medium, by the way, you can purchase this downstairs in the gift shop as well. But enough from me. We are all really here to hear from Maureen Brunsdale.
Thank you. I just got back yesterday from Atlanta, Georgia, where I was with the Circus Historical Society for 6 days. I feel like I need a 12-hour nap, but I'm delighted to be back home and talk to you about somebody who's very near and dear to my heart, Antoinette Concello. When I was asked to do this speech, I started thinking, gosh, what should I talk about? And I thought, well, I'm a librarian. I could share with you all the sources that I found while doing research for this book, because as a librarian, who doesn't love uncovering sources? Yeah, and then I thought, well, maybe, I'm talking to people who are coming to a museum, and when I go to museums, I love seeing things. I love interacting with things and seeing things, so maybe what I should do is share some photos that I couldn't tuck into the book, because I found a lot, and they're really cool. And then, well, I thought perhaps I should offer my version of what happened in what the circus historians call, still to this day, the shooting. Bum, bum, bum. That was pretty good. And then lastly, I was driving to work, and I don't know, my mind was wandering as it is wont to do. And I thought, maybe I should just tell, as Paul Harvey would say, excellent. Now, those of you who know me know that I like having it all and trying to do it all. So what I'm going to do this afternoon is try to give you a little bit of everything, all of the above. So let's get into it, shall we? And let's do so by putting Antoinette Concello in the spotlight. Marie Antoinette Concello, or Como, in this picture, she's on the right. She was the fourth of 7 children born to Jane and Toussaint Como, April 22nd, 1910, in Sutton, Quebec, Canada. By 1915 or so just 5 years later, the Comos came to America because her father, Toussaint, was a man who chased a lot of dreams. Grass was always greener on the other side. There was a better job, a better life, better gambling opportunities. A few years later, after Jane birthed their 7th child, she'd had enough. She left Toussaint. And naturally, this had a huge impact on all the children. The older ones, like Rose and Mickey, pictured here, found work. The younger ones, like Antoinette, became a ward of the state of Vermont. In fact, in 1923, she was one of only 2 girls that were admitted to a school. Most orphan girls, you see, were sent to be labor, either on the farm, in the kitchen, as a nanny, particularly if you were French Canadian. There was a big, heavy bias in Vermont against French Canadians. But Antoinette had something special. She had some intellect, so they sent her to school. And the school they sent her to, Mount St. Mary's Academy, run by the Sisters of Mercy. There, she was enrolled in a classical education, and she also participated in basketball. Newspaper reports said that she was tenacious and fierce on that court. This photo is not from her time, but I had to throw it in. I mean, that's a black and white ref that I've never seen before. And it did come from Mount St. Mary's Academy just a few years later. Antoinette excelled scholastically, but emotionally, she was failing. She'd been abandoned. She was alone, and the school records show no family visits, ever. By 1927, Antoinette wanted out of that convent school. She agreed to meet her sister Mickey in Detroit. I have to share a little bit of Mickey's story for the rest of Antoinette's story to make sense, so let me do that here. Mickey, as stated earlier, found work in the woolen mills in the eastern seaboard. While she was walking to work one day with her good friend, they spied with their eagle eyes a Sells Floto Circus poster. They'd never been to a circus, so they went, and they never went back to their woolen mill jobs. She became a member of the Flying Wards, which meant that Bloomington became her home in the winter months. And here in Bloomington is where she practiced, in this barn. I'm a farm kid. I love this barn. This barn was on East Emerson Street, and she was working for Eddie Ward, who is in the center of this photograph. You can see him, he's in his leotard and tights there. So back to Antoinette. She had written Mickey and said, I have to get out of this school. And Mickey said, well, find a way to Detroit. If you can find a way to Detroit, we'll see what we can do. Antoinette did, and saw her sister in the Sells Floto Circus, and after seeing her first circus, begged her sister, don't make me go back to that boarding school. I don't want to be a nun. I'd rather jump in the river than die than go back, is what she said. So Mickey went to Eddie Ward and begged him, please let my sister become part of the act. He agreed and changed history forever, paid her $15 a week to be generally useful, a term that is in circus contracts to this day. As a flying ward, Antoinette gained oodles of confidence, as seen in this saucy picture. And of course, it also meant that she came back to Bloomington and to that barn at the end of the season to train. And there, in that barn, is where she met Arthur Marshall Vasconcellos. They went out as flying wards in 1929, and on May 30th, in what she now called her magic city, Detroit, they got married. But Eddie Ward, the leader of that act, the Flying Wards, had passed away in March, leaving his widow in charge. His widow was Mamie, and she was a tough cookie. She never liked art. She never wanted married people on her act. So she sent Art packing back to Bloomington and retained Antoinette as a newlywed in her act. Here's a picture of Antoinette, second from left there, standing next to Mamie Ward in the Flying Ward act. Now for Art, I'm sure he thought enough of that stuff. So next year, 1930, he formed his own act, the Flying Concellos, which consisted of Art, Antoinette, and Sherry's father, hi Sherry, George Valentine. They trouped with a small show, the Robbins Brothers Circus initially, and eventually, and really pretty quickly, they worked their way up to the greatest show on earth, the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus. The up-and-coming big stars went to Europe in the winter of 1932-33 to work in Berlin. There, they met up with the Cadonas on the left, the Amadoris in the center, and of course, the Concellos are on the right. And their catcher by this time is Everett White. You heard of White's Place? It's his grandfather. I have to say something about the act on the left, Alfredo Cadona and the Flying Cadonas. Alfredo was known as the greatest flyer of all time. If you look him up on YouTube, you're going to see a male ballerina performing in the air without a floor. It's magnificent. So what do you suppose he thought of the Concello act? The answer, my friends, came from Circus World Museum up in Baraboo, and he writes in this letter that in the Thrillers, which was another Bloomington-based act, I was disappointed, but the Concellos have a good act. The girl is excellent, and with a good teacher, she would be an artist. So he liked Antoinette. Didn't much think great things about art, but he liked Antoinette. That's pretty exciting stuff, right? But it wasn't all sunshine, happiness, and hard work in Berlin. Antoinette hurt her shoulder for the first time there. That's a very common injury for trapeze performers. Think about it, you want to catch evenly, right? That's not always going to happen, and when it doesn't, you hurt your shoulder. It was there while she was hospitalized that her star power was really realized. The paparazzi were hanging around in the hospital, always asking, how is Antoinette? How is Antoinette? Pictures were in the paper in Berlin about this Bloomingtonian woman. Art made note of that. A couple of years later, Alfredo Cadona, suffered a similar injury, and by 1937, made headlines for a lot of the wrong reasons, namely the murder-suicide he committed. By this time, Antoinette is chasing what many see as the impossible, the killer trick. Antoinette, you see, wanted to be the first woman to catch it, the triple somersault. She'd been doing the triple to the net for years, but she was inspired to actually catch it, thinking if men can do it, why the heck can't I? In fact, her pursuit of it was a full-page spread in the Chicago Tribune in 1937. And she did do it just a few months later. She caught that trick in her magic city of, right, for their Shrine Circus. With this accomplished, her circus star was set in concrete. Celebrity endorsements started rolling in for things like Wheaties cereal, fountain pens, bakery companies, and Camel cigarettes, which she said both calmed her nerves and gave her the pep she needed to do her job. With the triple accomplished, she set her sights on something much more personal. She wanted a family. And we know with Antoinette, if she wants it, she's gonna get it. I know. Randall Cope Concello, the little guy there, was born February 16th, 1945 in Tampa, Florida. Family friend and Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey band leader, Merle Evans, drove Antoinette to the hospital. Why? Because Art was back here in Bloomington. His mom was dying and died just 2 weeks later, in fact. Now, Randy, he looks pretty sweet here, right? But he was a handful. He was spoiled rotten by parents who wanted to give their child everything they themselves didn't have growing up. In fact, for his 7th Christmas, he was given a house sized for him, complete with electricity and a telephone. I was 7 once. I didn't get any of that. By the early 1950s, Antoinette was used to being in the spotlight, and Art, her husband, well, he always excelled at being in the shadows. Star stalkers, gossip mongers, circus fans and friends knew what the magazine Greater Show World suggested. Is Antoinette Concello discussing her domestic problems with a lawyer? You betcha. She was doing so because her husband was the poster boy for philandering. By 1953, his main squeeze was British showgirl Maggie Smith. We're getting to the shooting part of my talk. Here's the setup. It's October. The greatest show on earth is nearing the end of its season in El Paso, Texas. Here's what we know. Maggie Smith was shot in the back hip. The bullet lodged in her kidney, and it stayed there the rest of her life. What we don't know is how it got there. Stick with me a minute. Newspapers related 4 different stories. The first one was this. Art and Maggie went out for a drink after the last show of the evening. They were walking next to the railroad tracks where the circus train was parked when a stranger comes up, shoots her, and flees. Rather quickly after that story rolled off the presses, 3 more followed. The last of which was this. Art alone was walking late at night near the railroad tracks. He spied with his eagle eye a young British showgirl and told her that she needed to be careful. Out of concern for her safety, wink, wink, he invited her to his car. While she relaxed on the couch, he showed her how a pistol works. The girl's got to protect herself, and boom! It doesn't add up. Truth of the matter is that there's only 3 people who know what truly happened that night in El Paso, and sadly, they're not here. So, what do I think? Yep, I think Antoinette had had enough and fired that shot. Maybe she wanted him or his girlfriend dead. Maybe that's what was going through her mind in my favorite picture of the 2 of them. This picture's unique because Antoinette's usually looking right at the camera and Art is looking away, but the roles are reversed here, and I love it. For her part, Maggie Smith never pressed charges. The whole thing was hushed up rather quickly, the show closed, and everyone went their own way. By 1956, just 3 years later, Antoinette had truly had enough. She filed for divorce and was granted one, along with sole custody of Randy, who by this time had morphed into a real hellion. He'd been schooled in places like Sarasota, then he was sent up to Boston, back to Sarasota, out to another place, and finally ends up in school in Switzerland in the early 1960s. Periodically, though, he was sent back home to the place that Antoinette called home, here in Bloomington, which is where this photo was taken. It's a photo of, he was known as Papa Vass, Art's father. Randy's in the center, of course, and his second wife, Ollie Mae. Speaking of Europe, John Ringling North, who was president of the Ringling Brothers Barnum Bailey Circus, was tasked a reluctant, and I can't state it enough, a hugely reluctant Art Concello to take his circus to Europe in 1963-64. Concello and his Bloomington-based crew did all the prep work to make that happen. But oddly, Art told his old friend and band leader, Merle Evans, to go take a tour of Europe shortly before the show was set to open. Why did he do that? When you think of circus, you think of sounds, you think of performances set to music. You've got to have the 2 working together, and yet Art says, go, take a tour of Europe. It's like he wanted it to fail. And that's what I think. I don't know why, though. Well, it did open, and John Ringling North was extremely unhappy with it. So as John Ringling North was not reluctant to do, he fired Art, sent him packing. So Art comes back to Sarasota, and then John Ringling North, his second action is to send a telegram to Antoinette. We need you. Come to Europe. Be my artistic director. She does. She flew over first class and took the artistic reins of the Ringling show, continuing to do that until 1984. She often garnered press along the way as she held casting calls for showgirls in all the major metropolitan cities across the country. I'm going to share a couple photos of her at this time. The first is when she was about 50 years old, and I hate her just a little. Yeah. She's pictured here with Rudy Bundy. Rudy Bundy is the man who took Art Concello's place as executive vice president of Ringling Brothers Barnum Bailey. The second photo I'm going to show is from later, the mid-1970s, where she's cuddled up to Tito Gaona, who is considered the second coming of Alfredo Cadona. He's incredibly charming, effervescent, and talented in the air. He's a trapeze flyer. Antoinette died in Randy's house, which was next door to Maggie and Art's house. Chain smoking those Camel cigarettes led to lung cancer. Chemo and radiation were harsh in the 80s, and so she stopped treatment in January. Less than 3 weeks later, she died on February 5th. I'd like to think that before she passed, maybe she was reliving some of the best moments from her life. Maybe she was thinking about some of the interviews that she did. Maybe she was reflecting on the first time she caught that first triple in Detroit. I'd like to take a few minutes here to share with you some film. The first is from a PBS documentary, and where she talks about the pursuit of the triple and using a mechanic, which was a safety device around your waist to break your fall should you need it. It's not going full?
The greatest woman flyer was a convent girl from Burlington, Vermont, Antoinette Concello. She began in 1927 and, taught by her husband, Art Concello, was soon doing difficult tricks. By 1934, she was doing the 2.5, the only woman ever to do it. Girls have long been a part of flying acts, but usually just and give them a little glamour. Not this lady. By 1937, she was doing the incredible, the triple. No other woman has ever done it.
Up until the time I started, a double was the biggest trick a woman had ever done. So I was very anxious to try these different things, and I really didn't actually know the value of them at the time but I just wanted to do certain things. The triple, it was a great thrill because I had just potentated a shrine in Detroit, who we were working for at the time. It kidded me for several years, wanted me, said, when are you going to do the triple for me? I had taught several in practice, and I had done some in the mechanic and some out of the mechanic and this and that and the other. We opened in Detroit anyway, the opening night, and everything went fine. We did all the complete act. So Art put the raise up and nodded to our catcher, and Mr. Stinson, who was the potentate then, knew what I was going to do then. So the drummer in the band picked up a drum roll, and it was a dead silence. Oh, there was just a big lull, silence, the whole building, and the people were, well, what we call a straw house. People were sitting way up to the ring curbs. I did the triple and caught it and returned to the bar, and Mr. Stinson went to the microphone and described to the audience and told them what they had just witnessed, and it had been the first time in circus history that it had ever been accomplished by a woman flyer. And he had always told me that when I did the triple for him, he'd buy me the nicest dress that I ever had. So the next morning, his wife appeared at the hotel and took me shopping. Oh, she brought me a beautiful dress. It was beige, and well, I can't quite describe it now. The styles have changed, you know, some since then. But I was very proud of it.
The second film we're going to see was shot by a local circus fan by the name of Harold Ramage. Does anyone remember the Kaiser Van Leer hardware store here in town? He was its executive here. And Kaiser Van Leer was known in the circus business as providing a lot of hardware, a lot of rigging for the flyers. He shot this home movie in that glorious old barn on Emerson Street. For those of you who remember the Grand Hotel, it sat right behind that. Let's take a look. Art and Antoinette are on the pedestal board, and Art is flying to their catcher. She's doing some simpler tricks first. He caught the triple with a pirouette back. Wouldn't you love to go to that barn? Oh my gosh. Here she's trying it. 1, 2, 3. She just misses it. The fact is that we have no film of Antoinette catching that trick, but I believe she caught it immediately afterwards, because the next snippet of film that we see, I'm not going to show it, but is of them bouncing in the net as if they're celebrating something big, and I think that something big was her first triple here in Bloomington in that barn. Magical stuff. And we've reached the time now for the rest of the story. What happened after Antoinette died? Well, she was cremated and her ashes are here in Bloomington at Park Hill Cemetery. What happened to Art? Well, he wed Maggie Smith 4 months after Antoinette died in a very unromantic fashion. A justice of the peace showed up at their door, Maggie said, and she didn't know she was getting married that day. And he said, "Go get the ring." And she said, "What ring?" And it was, the wedding was performed. She said, "My wedding dress was my house coat. And I served that tea for the reception." Not a romantic guy, not Art. As for Art, he passed away July 4th, 2001 of pneumonia. His ashes are in Sarasota. Randy, their son, he passed away February 14th, 2009, after a life filled with lots and lots of golf. And he was an attorney by trade, often representing circus people who needed an attorney. Maggie, she died in November of 2018. She's cremated and her ashes are in Sarasota as well. So that's it. I've shown you a few documents, a few images, I've talked about the shooting, and done my Paul Harvey bit. It's time now to share my resources and offer my thanks to you for paying attention. Thank you for being here. I'll take any questions if you have them. Let's go here first. Oh, here? Yeah. Wait, we have to get it on
Use
film.
the microphone so our live stream friends can hear us.
One of the photos you put up, she was standing after the interview. Do you know how old she was in that picture?
Yeah, she was 50. That's why I hate her a little bit. Do you have a question?
Why didn't Bloomington have the foresight to keep the barn and turn it into a circus museum?
Oh,
That was a
man.
great place, and so was the YMCA, which now has a plaque out in front of it. But, you know, that to me seems like such a waste.
You know, I was born and raised on a farm in a barn in North Dakota, so I am not the right person to answer that question. I don't know if the right person is here. I'm looking to you, Candace. I would love for it to have been. I can tell you this, that before the barn was demolished, it was such a big deal for circus and its historians that Baraboo, the home of Circus World Museum and Library, sent a team down here to look and see if it would be possible to move the whole darn thing 3.5 hours up. Not economically feasible. So then they sent another team of architects and they made really detailed drawings of that barn. Those reside in Baraboo, so you can get a sense of the dimensions, the height, how it was girded, the structural dynamics of it. But sadly, I'm with you. I think it should have been saved, but it wasn't. Any other questions? Yes? Oh, hang on, Guy. Microphone's coming to you.
What was the actual function? I remember the restaurant. And what was the function of that building before it was a restaurant?
It was Eddie Ward's house. So he and Mamie, that was the house that they moved into, and then they built that barn for the purpose of training flyers. So that's where they lived. Typically, the male flyers would live in that house, and the female flyers were in a different house. So that's where they were at the end of the season, October to April-ish, was in that house.
It's too bad at least that had preserved.
Right, the Grand Hotel. Do you know why it had that name, hotel? Was it a hotel? No, it was never ever a hotel. But it got that name because in the circus in America, before it went on rail, of course, they would travel by wagons, think the late 1700s, early 1800s, and they would stay in hotels. And the hotels would have obviously lodged them, but also feed them. So when the meals were ready, they ran up a hotel flag on the lot that said hotel, and everyone could just look up to see if, breakfast, lunch, dinner, is it ready? Is the hotel flag up? If it is, you can go eat. So that's how it got the name Grand Hotel. Yes, Mike is coming.
What years was she the artistic director of the Ringling Brothers?
She was the artistic director from 1963 to 1984. Yep.
Any more questions? Oh, yep.
I remember seeing the movie with Betty Hutton.
Greatest Show on Earth. Yep.
And were they in that film?
Art Concello was not, but you can see Antoinette dropping bars from the pedestal board for the flyers in that film, absolutely. And she actually has credits on the poster. Her name is pretty high. Cecil had a little bit of a crush on her, it seems. I've seen the letters between the two. They're fabulous. They're absolutely fine. There's nothing untoward going on between them, but it's clear he has a little bit of a crush on her.
Was that the Greatest Show on Earth?
Yes. Yep.
Charlton Heston?
Yes. Charlton Heston's role was based on art, down to the fedora hat. He had to get the hat right.
A lot of local circus people,
Yes.
like Richard Shipley. If you went to the cemetery walk and saw Richard Shipley, the elephant trainer, he's mentioned by name in that movie.
Yep. Tuffy Genders is in that. He's also a Bloomingtonian and took over as GM in the later 60s and into the 80s. I'm sorry.
I was watching that interview with Antoinette and how the camera person went to her hands.
Yeah.
And then I glanced at you, Maureen, the light on your face as you were watching someone who you clearly adore.
Yeah.
And it was just a really well-shot piece of film, but my favorite was your reaction.
Oh, well, thank you. It's I've always had a thing for hands, people's hands. They tell a lot about a person, right? So when I saw that particular footage and I heard her voice for the first time, it was like a shriek of discovery, like, what? But to see her hands that had been so powerful and clearly still had strength in them, it was a magical moment. Thank you.
This has a question about pretty much the wards, because I remember my mom talking about how excited she was that, that she knew growing up here that there were aerialists wintering. How did they end up in Bloomington?
Boy, that's a story that goes back a long, long time. The wards are the people responsible, in my estimation, for really making this place a factory of producing a lot of flyers. But it goes back well into the 1870s when the first gymnasium, which was in an old church that had been abandoned, just across the street here, and a couple of brothers by the name of Green joined that first gymnasium, and they did tricks on this new apparatus called a trapeze, and then they started trooping, and they became the Levans, and they were just incredibly, they had an incredible career. That's covered mostly in my first book, the first book that we published, but that gym, I love telling this story to my students. So that first gymnasium, the president of the group that got that first gymnasium going, what was his name? Yeah, his first initial was I, and his last name was Fell. I fell. Yeah, you'll never forget it now, right?
Any other questions? Oh, one more.
Yes.
Do you think the reason, the fact that we had trains intersecting and cutting
Sure.
through, I think that probably had a lot to do with Bloomington being on the map for
Yeah,
that. But
absolutely.
It could have been anywhere, really. It just happened to be Providence, that it happened to be Bloomington Normal.
Well, and we had these big barns, right? And we were a farming community, and as a farm kid, I like to think, you know, our corn grows really high, so our kids were used to looking up high. So why not go up there and see what I can do, right?
All right. Well, I'm sure if you have any more questions. Oh, one more. Yep.
How did you get interested in aerialist?
That's the $1 million question.
You know, it was a happy accident. Milner Library was undergoing a reorganization, as sometimes happens. And the associate dean, who was my boss at the time, came to my office one day and knocked on my door and said, Maureen, you know, we're reorganizing and I need you to take some subjects and be a liaison to departments on campus. I said, okay, you know, I can do that. What are you thinking? He said, well, I'd really like for you to take geography, geology, and military science. And I told him, well, other than having a name that's misspelled for the Marine Corps or Marine, I don't know much about those, but I'll give it a try, sure. And he's like, great, thanks. And he jumps out of his chair and he starts walking out of my office. And I said, wait. I said, what about special collections? And he turns and he looks at me. He says, you want that? I said, yeah, why not? Nobody wants that. I was like, I'll take it. Pause. About a week passes, and there's a knock on my door. And I turn, and it's my associate dean again. He comes in, and he won't look me in the eye. We know, we all have worked for people in our lives. When they don't look you in the eye, there's trouble. We know that, right? And I thought, gosh, I haven't done anything. I haven't spent any money in military science, geography, or geology yet, so I can't. What have I done? And he sits down, and he's not looking at me, and he says, you know, Maureen, there are people higher up on the totem pole here than you. I'm like, yeah, I'm aware of that. He says, well, I've got 2 other faculty who want military science and geography and geology. I said, okay, you know, that's how it happens. And I said, what about special collections? Nobody wants that anymore. Nobody wants that. This is where it gets freaky, but in a good way. So I was delighted I had special collections, and I started going through things in special collections. And one of the first things I found was a scrapbook with the black pages and the white pen, you know, like our grandparents had. It was a courting scrapbook. So this guy was dating this girl. It was the story of their time before they got married. And I see his name, and I think, you know, that's a really common name from where I grew up. It's spelled B-R-A-A-T-H-E-N. Broughton is how it's pronounced. There's still Broughton construction up there, anyway. I thought, that's really kind of cool. I'll remember his name. I'm flipping. Holy cow, this guy is from my hometown. I'm looking at pictures of my hometown from like 19 teens. This is crazy. But it gets worse or better, depending on your perspective. I flip another page and I see it. And I think if anyone had a recording device at the time, they would have heard the shriek of discovery. What? There is a picture of his future bride, Sverre Broughton's future bride, standing in the prettiest place in Mayville. It's our cemetery. It's where the trees are. And you can see my family name on the gravestone between her feet. So that led me to dig deeper into this Sverre Broughton guy. I recognized very quickly that he had amassed a huge collection of circus memorabilia. He had written about his time growing up in Mayville, mentioning by name a grandfather I never met, and he had this undying love for circus. So I pretty much had to know, like, why, right? That's what got me into it. Thanks for the question. I'm sorry the answer's so long.
Well, on that note, I think that's a great way to shift and to our book signing downstairs. But once again, thank you, Maureen, for a fantastic program. Let's give her one more round of applause.
Thank you.
And thank you once again to WGLT, our live stream sponsor. And I'll take a page out of, where is he sitting? Don't know where he's sitting. May all your days be circus days. Thank you again.